So among the very many scams out there, it seems to be, uh, that are directed towards people who are unhappy with the way their life is, and they want things to get better. One of these many scams is this idea of the law of attraction. So I discovered there's even the lawofattraction.com, and they've trademarked the lawofattraction.com. And so, these folks describe it as the idea that the law of attraction is the ability to attract into our lives whatever we are focusing on, right? So, the idea is that somehow, if we can, if we can bring into view the thing that we want, we can attract it to us, right? So there's a lot of time spent. You could imagine visualization as something that you do in support of this. And in this kind of scammy webpage, they attribute this view to the Buddha, who they claim said that, whatever you think you become. So the Buddha did not say that. Or at least we don't have any. I mean, that's not part of the evidence we have about what the Buddha said. The Buddha said that every moment. I mean, one of the principal teachings is that every moment is a choice. It's a choice that's conditioned by prior states of the world, and will in turn condition future states of the world. So we should choose wisely, and those who operate according to desire, like, choose poorly on the Buddha's account, because what they do is they treat the world not as though it's a process, but as though it's something that we could acquire. But because the world is really basically process that he called dependent origination, right? The things that we think that we can possess, we can't, right? Those things are really just kind of momentary regularities, or in what's ultimately a changing process. And so uh, he did have this idea that, if you choose wisely, you can have a positive impact on the future. But almost everybody would agree to that. Um, and if anything, the Buddha's idea that when you choose wisely, and you choose in a manner that avoids desire but is influenced by compassion, you eventually head off into the void, nirvana, and the void is not anything we can really describe. So, if you're looking for support for the law of attraction or manifestation in the philosophy of the Buddha, you're not really going to find it. Okay, but it is something that might not seem all that um, foolish, to the extent that paying attention to the things that are important, or goals that you have, seems to be a condition of approximating those goals, right? So, if my goal is to be someplace, having it in my mind as an objective, you might think is an important part of organizing myself so I actually go there. But notice, insofar as I spend some time visualizing this goal as something that I want to get to, I don't attract it to me. Like, I go there, right? So if my objective is to, what I want is to be someplace for dinner tonight, it doesn't come to me. I go to it, right? So the model that this idea of the law of attraction um, depicts seems to get things kind of backwards, right? It makes it sound as though the attitude that we have of belief or attention to the thing that we're interested in does the work of bringing that thing to us. Now, uh, you know, what's of course somewhat transparent, if you were to take a step back and look at this proposal, is that there's very little evidence that it works, right? So, I read once that Jim Carrey, I don't know if it's entirely true, but Jim Carrey claimed that he once visualized having $10 million dollars, and then several years later on, he signed a movie deal and he got $10 million dollars for that. And that was used as evidence of the law of attraction. I don't know if he really did. I just read it online, so it may not be true. But I've heard stuff like that said before, right? I've heard people claim that if you want something, you have to kind of spend some time visualizing it, and then, poof, it'll happen. Now, the problem is, of course, with this theory is that it's easily disprovable, right? All you have to do is take an open survey of all the people who ever pined for something and thought about it quite clearly and never got it, right? Now, I think what's also worth noting is that insofar as this theory has anything to recommend, right? Insofar it suggests that we should do something because it's going to produce, it's going to lead to this end that we want, right? What we're working with when we're thinking about this law of attraction is a kind of consequentialism, right? It's justifying a practice, namely visualizing some end, because the idea is that that's going to kind of lead to that end. It's going to be an outcome of that practice. Okay. Now, so the reason why I think this is a bit of a scam, well, there's two parts. I mean, the first is that it seems to, first of all, there's plenty of evidence to the contrary. So as far as scams go, right, it's like top of the list because it's demonstrably implausible, right? If it was really something effective, then merely visualizing, the object of your fancy would materialize that object. But like life doesn't work that way, right? You can fall in love with someone in the movies and visualize them and then like kind of make room for them in your life and all the things that you might think comes along with rendering yourself attractive to this movie star. They're not going to just magically show up in your life, right? And even if you just kind of threw yourself at them, it's very unlikely they're going to reciprocate. So your mental state, the amount, the intensity with which you desire that outcome, really not only doesn't itself manifest an outcome, it could actually backfire, right? There is such a thing as wanting something too much, where you undermine and undercut your capacity to, say, woo people you want to woo, or ingratiate yourself with people you're interested in becoming closer to, or even accomplish kind of more material things, because you are too you are approaching these objectives purely from the subjective point of view, right? And there's something kind of weird and also creepy about that, right? So it's weird because if it's a real outcome that I want, my own subjective point of view can't really, it's got to be something outside of that. Otherwise, it's just a figment of my imagination, right? So figments of my imagination I can certainly manifest, but the actual outcomes that kind of those figments of my imagination represent, right? Not so much, right? So then kind of the theory that you go from this kind of focus to actually bringing that thing that you're interested in towards you doesn't, it does, it's, first of all, it doesn't really stand very much to scrutiny. You can find lots of counterexamples. Not only does it not work, but you could think about cases where it significantly undermines your capacity to attract the thing you wanted to attract. Okay, now, and as I suggested, it seems to be like a version of consequentialism. So if you watch the first video in the series on manifestation, where I contrasted yoga with consequentialism, you'll know that for there are problems with consequentialism, and there are problems that yogis, I think, would recognize, right? If you're a committed consequentialist, you are interested in action insofar as it produces some end, right? But the problem is for the consequentialist is that, well, there's two problems, right? One problem is that the more unlikely the end, the less it can function as a justification for an action. So if there's something really special I want and it's unlikely for me to achieve it or for it to happen, it doesn't play a very strong justifying end for anything that I choose to do, right? And the second related problem is that there doesn't seem to be a great connection on the consequentialist picture between the things that I do and the ends I'm interested in, right? So, let's take happiness, for instance, um, or, the avoidance of suffering, right? I could avoid suffering maybe by living a happy life where things go my way, or by just maybe being dead, right? So I don't experience anything, or maybe just being drugged out the entire time, right? So there's several different ways that I might accomplish this end, but there's a weird way in which any of these means to that end, they're kind of not only remarkably different, uh, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of real connection between the means and the end, right? And one worry then between this disconnect between the means and the end is that if I want to be able to control this end, if I want to really be able to relate to it in a manner that's good for me on my own terms, if I can't control the outcome by virtue of something I do, then I'm basically setting myself up for a kind of practical failure. Okay, so really, as people interested in manifesting goals, etc., we want there to be a close connection between the goals and the actions in order for us to maintain control over over that end. Okay, so this is kind of where the yoga picture comes into view, because yoga is this theory that says that the meaningfulness of your actions have to do with their role in a practice, and this practice is defined not by the ends or the goals, but by devotion to the ideal of the practice. And then as you perfect the practice, the good things start to happen as an outcome of the practice. Now, in point of fact, in book 3 of the Yoga Sutra, which is a main focus on one of our courses, on specifically dedicated to this topic, question of manifesting prosperity and success. In book 3, there's a lot of talk about concentration as part of a program to bring about powers and capacities and ends and things that we want. And certainly we know from, if anybody is actually engaged in any kind of practice, you will know that visualization is actually very powerful within the context of a practice, right? There's been research that shows that if you visualize, throwing basketballs at a hoop, right? That actually helps you throw basketballs at a hoop. If you visualize a physical activity, then it's somewhat easier for you to step into that practice, as long as, right, that visualization is kind of informed by the things that you would need to be aware of as you are practicing, right? So it's not that visualization can't play a role in bringing about your ends, right? But the question is, how is this going to happen? How is it going to work? Well, this is only answerable if we have a larger picture of what it is for us to succeed in bringing about the ends that we want, right? And if the consequentialist picture doesn't make much sense, if we can't kind of work backwards from the ends that we want to the things we need to do to bring it about, right? We have to kind of work forward from a practice that we can master, that allows us to bring about the things that would be nice for us, right? But I think one of the interesting things about yoga, which is this theory, instead of kind of working backwards from our goals, we rather kind of we work forward from the question of practice. We take that as basic. Uh, so one of the things that I think is really important when we switch our thinking to a yogic framework is it shows us that there are probably lots of ends and goals that we could talk about and we might even pine after and want. But once we start to practice yoga, we would stop thinking of them as really things that we want or need, right? So it might be the case that you get interested in yoga as a means to practice something that's going to make you successful. But once you become committed to this project, right, there's going to be a lot of goals and ends that simply fall off the list of the things that you are really going to be those that interested in. And the goals and interests, the goals and ends that are going to fall off the list are the ones that aren't good for you. And the ones that aren't good for you are the ones that can't be a function of the success of your practice, right? So yoga then is a project to help us be successful, but the success that we could reasonably endorse as we start to practice has got to be the kind of success that's simply a byproduct of our practice. So what does this look like in real life? Well, I think one of the things that it does look like in real life is that you stop worrying about kind of outcomes down the line and you start paying attention to the outcomes of your actual choices at the moment, right? With the view to shifting the boundaries, right? So you view the future not independently of your practice, but as something that you are kind of working towards as you practice. And that, of course, changes the entire discourse from one where we are simply attracting the things that we want, as though that could really work in every case, to one where we are mastering ourselves and accomplishing ourselves as people, and in the process, the good things that we want start to happen.